Loyola Chicago Ramblers have been one of the most consistent teams in college basketball over the last decade. In the past 2 seasons, they finished 23-10 and 15-3 in the A10, and last season they finished 25-12 and 12-6 in the A10. They took a little bit of a stumble moving over from the Missouri Valley going into Atlantic 10 play. However, Drew Valentine has built this program back up to its what I would call normal standards for Ramblers fans, and now it's no different. Last season, you might remember they made a nice run to the NIT Semifinals before they ultimately fell to Chattanooga. However, they now have their eyes set on returning back to that NCAA tournament. This would be the first time since leaving the Missouri Valley Conference in 2022. And on paper, I think Drew Valentine's actually put together a very strong team that could break that little drought for the Ramblers here. So let's go ahead and start diving into this roster that I already love. Before we start talking about this season's roster, let's go ahead and talk about a couple of the key players that they lost coming off of last season's roster. Obviously, Desmond Watson and both Sheldon Edwards Jr. were two large losses from last season. However, it was due to the transfer portal. It was due so to the fact they ran out of eligibility. Desmond Watson averaged 12.9 points, 3.7 rebounds, 2.6 assists, and 1.4 steals, while Edwards Jr. averaged 11.6 points, 3.6 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. So that's two big losses. In terms of the transfer portal, they actually did what I would say pretty well overall compared to quite a few other teams in this modern era of college basketball in the wide open portal. They lost Jalen Quinn to Drake, who was a very key rotational player for the Ramblers last season. He averaged 7.1 points, 1.9 rebounds, 2.3 assists. So he's heading over to Henderson at Drake underneath new leadership for yet the third time in 3 seasons. But then outside of Jalen Quinn, they also lost Jaden Dawson, who is a senior, now headed to Kansas after finishing a very strong campaign last season. He finished with 13.9 points, 3.1 rebounds, 1.9 assists, and 1 steal per game. So they lost quite a bit of talent. However, let's go ahead and start talking about who they have returning, because that's where I'm going to get really excited. In terms of returning talent, there is a lot to love about this roster coming into next season. At the very top is Miles Rubin. I love Miles Rubin. This is one of the best defensive bigs in the entire country. Miles Rubin averaged 9.6 points, 5.5 rebounds, 1.3 assists, and 2.3 blocks per game last season. Just tremendous player, next level talent player. And I think we haven't seen that full offensive breakout from him yet that I think we truly could see. And I think that's going to be coming in this season. We'll talk more specifically about him here in a little bit. But outside of Rubin returning, they also have Kaimane Huensao. Sure, we'll go with that. Anyway, 5.8 points, 4.6 rebounds, and 3.1 assists. He was a big help when, well, let me get to him. Fellow returnee Justin Moore went down due to injury last season. He really stepped up and helped lead the team in terms of playmaking abilities, because it became kind of a group effort among everyone on the Ramblers last season. So, as I just mentioned, Justin Moore is also returning. I think this is tremendously huge because he was absolutely going off before he went down with a season-ending injury last season. He was averaging 7.7 points, 2.1 rebounds, and a remarkable 5.3 assists per game. Very important, very excited that he's returning back to the Ramblers. We'll talk a little bit more about him as well here in a minute. And then outside of that, they also have Daniil Glazkov, who was a freshman last season, didn't play much, but I think there's some raw talent there that actually could be where he could become a contributor in this team coming off the bench. Jury's still out a little bit there. And then lastly, they had Braden Young, who redshirted last season. And, we'll kind of see this is a pretty deep roster. I think it's going to be hard for some of these, what I would classify as like back end of the rotation, deeper part of the bench players. I think it's going to be hard for them to break into the rotation this season. They also have, just want to shout them out as well, they have 3 walk-ons returning as well. They have Caleb Reese, he averaged 1.3 points and 0.4 assists last season. And then Zachary Royster and Sam Urasek are both returning as well. Of course, walk-ons, we can imagine that they're going to play probably about the same amount that they did last season. So let's start talking about some of these key players coming back. Starting with Kaimane Huensao. I'm going to nail it one of these times, I'm going to tell you. Anyway, after transferring in from Washington State, he started in 24 of 28 games last season. He shot 52.9% overall from the floor, which was a career high. He did shoot just 18.8% from beyond the arc, but he only took 16 attempts, so who cares? He's a 6'7 forward. He's not a three-point threat, obviously, but on the flip side, he's strong inside the arc. Inside, he shot 58.3% overall. That was 336th in the country per Ken Bomb. And he does provide some really, really, really important defensive skills. He finished with a 15.8% defensive rebounding percentage and an 8.7 offensive rebounding percentage, which was 372nd in the nation. And one thing, actually, I kind of mentioned this, he's a strong playmaker for a 6'7" forward. Traditionally, these type of guys, now again, he's not what I would call your like 3-and-D wing. He's not going to be sitting outside popping a lot of threes, but he has that playmaking ability that actually makes him a very versatile player. He finished last season with a 26.7% assist rate. At 6'7", that's crazy. That was up tremendously from his 17.4% last year. So again, with Justin Moore going out last year, that was huge. He was a huge reason why they were still able to kind of, even though they were out without their main primary point guard, people like Haimani were able to step up and kind of fill that void, which out of a very traditional position where he would fit him in more as a small forward wing instead of being necessarily ball handler. So really just tremendous thing here. And then outside of that, yeah, that assist rate jumped to 29.6% in A10 play. So, I'm really love that this guy's coming back. Obviously, Justin Moore is going to be the primary point guard for them, but it's great to have players like this on the roster that, number one, they can rely on, and number two, can help break up what you would call a traditional role. So being able to have him come in and kind of, honestly, just be a little bit of a stat stuffer and kind of do a little bit of it all. Highlighted it. Miles Rubin's coming back. Love it. He's going to be a tremendous player. I think he's just going to, I think this season is going to be the one where we kind of see him just take that step forward and become what we think he can be. Last season, he had an 11.4 blocking percentage, which was 12th best in the country. And then that jumped up to 12.9 in the A10. I mean, this guy's just a defensive menace. And he's practically unstoppable in the paint. This is where I kind of mentioned earlier, I really want to see him take another step forward on offense. But last season, he shot a ridiculous 71.8% from the floor. That was 15th best in all of college basketball. And, I think if you feed him a little bit more, the dude's a monster. He's pretty much impossible to stop. So, you can imagine him averaging 13 points a game easy, because he's just that efficient on offense inside the arc. And then obviously on rebounding, he's very strong, finished with an 18.8 defensive rebounding percentage. That was 311th in the country. He is very much a traditional center. He's not going to be taking threes, and that's okay. Because this is, we're starting to see this trend back. For a while, it was like, all right, I'm not taking a center unless they can shoot threes. But we're kind of seeing that trend back to having a more traditional old school big like we used to see, 10 years ago. And Miles Rubin is an exemplary case of this, and I think he's going to be huge for the Ramblers coming in this season. Also mentioned this a little bit, but Justin Moore went down with a season-ending injury last season, and he was absolutely cooking before he went down with an injury. In 9 games, he was averaging 5.3 assists with a ridiculous 41.5% assist rate. That was a 5.3 to 1.4 assist to turnover ratio. Freaking bonkers. What I really want to call out is the Ramblers had such a good team last year, and again, people were able to step up, that even though he went down and they lost their primary point guard, who was exemplary through the first, few games in the non-conference play, outside that, they were able to kind of recover from that and pick up the torch and keep moving. I mean, they still won, obviously, over 20 games, won 12 games of conference. So, imagine having this guy fully healthy on an entire season, again, with some of that returning talent and the additional players that we'll talk about here in a little bit. Phenomenal. I think he's going to be the number one reason why the Ramblers could, I'm going to say could, because I'm recording this as of September 1st, 2025, win the A10 next season, but let's talk about expectations later. All right, so Daniil Glazkov is also returning, as mentioned. He was a freshman last season, didn't play a whole lot, but hey, he appeared in 33 games off the bench last season. He averaged 6.5 minutes per game in those. He shot 34.1% from the floor, 25% from three-point on 18 attempts. Most of his production came against the non-Division I matchups that they had in their non-conference schedule. However, per 24/7 Sports, he did come in as a 3-star recruit. He's coming out of the IMG Academy, and 0-3 actually had him listed as the 211th best recruit coming out of his class. Pretty deep roster. I don't think he's going to play a whole lot here again, but I think, you could see that maybe bump up to 10 minutes to kind of see what kind of production they can get out of him at a Division I level, because you can imagine there's going to be some more roster turnover, and if he decides to stay a third year, he could kind of fall more into a developmental role in his junior season. Earlier, Braden Young redshirt his freshman season, so he didn't play, but he had some offers from Texas Rio Grande Valley and Northeastern, so nothing crazy. I think he's going to still have a really tough time breaking into this rotation. He's 6'9", just with guys like Miles Rubin coming back in and Kaimani. I just don't think that he's going to be able to break into that rotation much this season. As a senior in high school, though, I want to call out he averaged 12 points, 7.3 rebounds, 1 assist, and 1.6 blocks per game. He could be a kind of guy that, again, maybe give him 6 to 8 minutes per game this season, across, 20 games or something like that, and kind of get him some of those minutes, because as a redshirt, you're going to be not really come in thinking you're going to play a lot probably as a freshman. So the point is getting him those developmental minutes and hope that maybe there is something in there that can be worth developing and going into his sophomore season. All right, so now that we talked about the players returning, let's talk about who's new on the roster and what kind of new faces that we have. So first off, we have Dominic Harris, who is a 6'3" guard coming out of UCLA. So Dominic Harris only averaged 1.1 points and 0.6 rebounds. He appeared in 11 games, averaged 7.3 minutes. Keep in mind, UCLA was a top 20 KenPom team. However, you might be looking at these metrics thinking, why do we care? We got Justin Moore at guard. We don't really necessarily need this guy who was the depth of bench warmers at UCLA. However, he was not a bench warmer at Loyola Marymount. Let's talk about some of his figures here. The season prior, before transferring into UCLA, he was absolutely unstoppable in the WCC for Loyola Marymount. He averaged 14.3 points, 3.3 rebounds, and 1 assist. He shot 42.9% overall and a remarkable 44.8% from beyond the arc. He was taking 6 threes a game, too. So, this guy is just a lights-out shooter. Coming out of high school, he's a former 4-star recruit, and it's easy to see why. He's a lights-out shooter. He was 33rd in the nation in that season at Loyola Marymount. He's not afraid to shoot the ball with a hand in his face. He finished his junior season with a 10.9% defensive rebounding percentage and a 2.5 offensive rebounding percentage. He's not much of a playmaker, so for 6'3", you'd think, maybe he can be a point guard. He's not, which I love because you have Justin Moore. So you can bring in Dominic Harris as a true shooting guard who has a tremendous ability to knock down three-point shots and just score from all over the court. So again, I don't think we'll see figures like he put up at Loyola Marymount, because there was a Loyola Marymount team that was just okay, and he was kind of one of the guys on that team. So I think those numbers will come down a little bit, but 8 to 10 points per game is 100% reasonable, maybe more. Maybe that 11 range, 12 range even. So I think this is a huge addition for Loyola Chicago, because he's just a lights-out spark plug offensively, and he can rebound the ball as well, so he's got some nice numbers there. So it's not like he's just an offensive player only, but his offense is the number one weapon. I'm excited to see him in this roster next season. One I am super pumped about for Loyola Chicago is Deywilk Tavarez. He's a 6'2" guard coming out of the College of Charleston. He shot 41.3% overall last season, 41.5% from beyond the arc, again on pretty much 6 attempts per game for the Cougars here. So in terms of his figures, he was averaging 12.9 points, 3.6 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and 1.1 steals per game. So he was pretty much, again, this is a College of Charleston team that was, pretty solid here. Chris Mack's been doing an incredible job since he landed down there. Very good job recruiting. They've been a team that could have been a sleeper pick, and especially if they had made the NCAA tournament, I think some people probably would have been picking them for an upset. But anyway, we're talking about Loyola Chicago here. So he does turn the ball over a little bit. So he had a 19.2% turnover rate last season and just a 2.5 to 2.4 assist rate. However, again, we don't need him to be a point guard. So we have Justin Moore who can be the primary point guard. But the beauty about having somebody like Tavarez is he can kind of play that combo guard. So let's say that Moore's out, you're 12 minutes into the first half, and you got Tavarez in there with someone else. Tavarez can handle the ball. It's not like he's, an albatross around that ability. It's just that his scoring is going to be the number one reason why he is on the court. He's him and Dominic Harris. You got two lights out shooters that you're bringing in here onto this roster. This is why I'm very excited about the roster. I think it could really be a dangerous team coming in throughout the season. Last year, he dropped 30 points twice. He did it, including in the 77-68 win over Loyola Chicago. Drew Valentine said, I'll take him. So later, obviously, nabbed him in the portal. He was lights out from deep in conference play in the CAA. He shot 45.6% overall. He's an elite scorer. Ramblers fans are going to love him. Drew Valentine really loved the guards in the transfer portal because they also got Cade Dotson out of New Mexico. He's a 6'2 guard. Spent his freshman year there. He appeared in 32 games off the bench. He averaged 6.7 minutes. He shot a nice 41.7% overall and 41.7% from three-point on 36 attempts. And no, every single one of his shots was not a three-pointer. I just happened to shoot the exact same thing there. 2 games really stacked his averages on the season, and it was 18 points against Texas A&M Corpus Christi out of the Southland Conference, and 10 points against Texas Southern, where both teams, they ran him up by a large score, so he was getting a lot of minutes of the game. However, it kind of shows glimpses into what can he do in expanded role opportunities, especially in, well, given the A-10 is a great conference, the Mountain West is still kind of that gray area tier that I would say is right a little bit above it. So, again, you're playing. You're not going to go play Southland opponents in the A-10, so you can imagine that he's probably going to see a similar level of production. I think he'll take a step forward a little bit going into his sophomore season. I think this is a great long-term pick for Drew Valentine because you already got people like Deywilk Tavarez, you got Dominic Harris, you got returning people. So, all of a sudden now you can kind of bring Dotson in, learn the system, and get ready for that junior season where he probably is going to take over a really important role. So at the forward position, they also picked up a California transfer out of Joshua Ala Joseph. He is a 6'8 forward. He spent 2 seasons at Minnesota prior to transferring into California, where he appeared in 24 games last season, started 10 of those. He shot 45.2% overall, and, beauty, he has a little bit of a three-point shot. He shot 36.5% from beyond the arc and 2.6 attempts last season. From inside the arc, he shot a remarkable 52.8% on this season, and in conference, that three-point shooting jumped to over 40%. He shot 40.6% on 32 attempts in the ACC. He is a very strong wing, and he's a strong rebounder. This is what I like. He can kind of do it all a little bit here. He finished with a 19% defensive rebounding percentage and a 6.6 offensive rebounding percentage throughout the season. So this is a guy that you can trust can knock down shots. And again, that three-point shot at his size, beautiful. Because as we mentioned, Kaimani is not a three-point shooter. So you have a 6'7 and a 6'8 forward on this roster, one that can set outside pop threes, and another one that can kind of be handling ball and driving offense on the inside post. So you kind of have 2 options there with size that's going to match up very well against opponents throughout the season. It was a little bit up and down for him last season, I'm not going to lie. He'd go from 10.6 points to 1 point to 14 points, but the potential's there. Against NC State, he finished with 13 points on 5-5 shooting and 2 of 2 from deep in just 16 minutes. I think with an expanded opportunity, we're going to see him be able to soar off more of his metrics. Start talking about the freshman. The last incoming transfer is Xavier Amos, who is a 6'8", registered as a center. I really don't love it when we do this. 6'8's a forward. I'm not saying he can't play center and he doesn't primarily play center, but 6'8's a forward. I'm one of those guys that I stand by. Size determines your position. If you're 6'7" and you can be a point guard, that doesn't make you a point guard. That makes you a forward wing that can handle the ball. Anyway, besides the point. He's listed as a center, but he spent last season at Wisconsin after spending 2 seasons at Northern Illinois. During his sophomore season at Northern Illinois, he averaged 13.8 points overall, 5.8 rebounds, 1.2 assists, and 1.5 blocks per game. He shot 49.6% overall and 38.5% from beyond the arc. Last season at Wisconsin, obviously, we're seeing this trend across the board where players are really good at that mid-major level, transfer up to the power conferences, don't see the minutes they want, and decide to transfer back where they can get playing time. Last season at Wisconsin, he averaged 3.5 points and 1.8 rebounds. So, still respectable on, again, a team that was well-known in Wisconsin and a very good team overall last season. So, reason to think that, he's going to probably return back to those Northern Illinois numbers, or at the very least, some mix of in the middle between Wisconsin and Northern Illinois. During that last season at Northern Illinois, he finished with a 4.4 blocking percentage. In a limited playing time, he finished with a 3.7% blocking percentage last season in Wisconsin. So, you already have Miles Rubin, who is a lockdown defender in the paint, and now you have a backup option that's going to be able to come off the bench when Rubin's not playing because, hey, Rubin can't play 40 minutes a game. So, you're now going to have this option in Amos coming off the bench to still constantly apply that defensive pressure this is why I think the Loyola Chicago Ramblers are going to be so good, because they have depth at nearly every position where they can fill in where their star players are coming out. So, love Amos. I think he's going to be able to come back and play into this expanded role again after coming out of Wisconsin. And keep in mind, too, I'm a big believer in experience. So I think him going to Wisconsin was probably a very good experience playing against top talent and be able to come down to the A10 now, which the A10 is still a very good league, to come into the A10 where, again, you're playing a lot of teams that are hungry and want to get back to the NCAA tournament. I think that experience at that next level is going to be crucial. So there's one additional player that we haven't talked about yet, and he's not a freshman, but also he's never played college basketball. So, yes, the glory of NIL money now in completely changing the landscape of college basketball. We have a senior slash freshman. He's a senior. He's not a freshman. But Alexander Richardson is a 6'9" center slash forward that is coming out of the pro leagues in Europe. He's 22 years old. It's going to be his first year of college basketball. Again, he's not a freshman just because this is his first year. He is listed as a senior in his class per Loyola Chicago's roster website. But, who doesn't love a 22-year-old first-year college basketball player? This is crazy times we're living in, folks. Anyway, so he spent his last 2 seasons playing for ART Giants Dusseldorf. Sick name. And prior to that, he spent 3 seasons with the Skyliners of Frankfurt in Germany. Last season, he averaged 10.6 points, 5.5 rebounds, 1.1 assists, while shooting 58.8% overall. He's a menace on the court. He had 9 double-doubles. Over his last 10 games, he averaged 13.2 points, 12 rebounds, and 2 assists with 5 double-doubles. So this is, again, weird, but awesome at the same point in time, because you have a menace in the paint. Now, let's keep in mind, he's going to come over here for the first time in college basketball. There's going to be some growing pains. He's not going to come in and just probably do what he was doing over in Germany. However, you're going to now have a set of towers in the paint with Richardson, Rubin, and Amos. I mean, that's an incredible 3-player deep roster here that we have. Now, given, Rubin's about 6'10"-ish, and Richardson 6'9", and Amos is 6'8". So, a little bit of very height, but you have 3 guys who are going to be defensive presence for every single opponent that they're playing. I mean, that is an incredible center depth chart there for center / power forward depth chart there. This guy is the real deal. I'm going to attach some highlights to another YouTube video down in the description of this video. And I highly recommend you watch it because this guy's legit. Again, I don't think he's going to come in and just blow out of the gate immediately, but I think he's that type of guy that's all of a sudden 10 games into the season, he's really starting to take off. Kind of once he gets through some of those non-conference games, kind of gets into the system and starts learning the ways of college basketball, because I do think there's growing pains regardless of how good you are. All right, so we're going to just hit on the couple of freshmen really quick here. We're not going to spend too much time because, again, in this modern era of college basketball, as a freshman, unless you're a 5-star All-American, you're probably not going to play a whole lot your first year. But regardless, I think it's important to cover them as we cover this entire roster. One freshman is Nick Anderson. He's a 6'4" guard coming out of Kansas per 24/7 Sports. He was a 3-star recruit. He was the second best in Kansas and 158th overall in the country. He had offers from Merrimack, Montana State, Robert Morris, and others. He was a prolific scorer in high school with a strong ability to rebound. Again, just loaded roster. He's probably not going to play a whole lot. The other freshman is Chuck Love III. He's a 6'7" forward coming out of LaPorte, Indiana. He's listed as a 4-star recruit and 129th best in his class. Again, I'll link some highlights down below, kind of like I was going to do for Richardson. I think Chuck could play some, actually. Again, they have a lot of depth at this forward position. However, he had a lot of really good offers. He had offers from West Virginia, Xavier, Oklahoma, Illinois, Mizzou, and a bunch of other power conference / high major conference teams. From what I watched in the highlights, and again, it's kind of hard watching because you don't know what kind of talent you're actually playing up against. I'm not necessarily a guru when it comes to high school basketball, rankings and knowledge about, the quality of talent he's playing here. However, what I noticed was he can knock shots down from outside. He can kind of flex as a wing, so not necessarily like a traditional power forward. At 6'7", he can really fit into that 3 spot and, again, knock down shots. And he kind of gives me that 3-and-D vibe, which I don't feel like Loyola has right now. So I think he could earn some minutes this year, but I do think Ramblers fans need to bookmark him because I think he's the type of guy that could become really, really good. I'm saying this like he's not a 4-star recruit and top 130 recruit in the country, because he obviously is. He obviously can be very good. But it's just that, like, again, this day and age, you don't know what you're getting, because it's going to be really hard for freshmen to break the court in terms of minutes. However, I think this is one freshman you should monitor, because I think that if he does, I think he could really shock some people. And it's crowded down there, especially in this position. But he's the type of guy that, could come out late in a game, or, early in a game, vice versa, and provide some important offensive minutes while he gets the experience playing up against some really top talent in the country. So as we wrap up this video, let's talk about some expectations coming into next season. So in terms of a starting lineup, I'm going to picture something like this. Justin Moore, point guard. Deywilk Tavarez at shooting guard. I think those two are locks. You can't do it. Miles Rubin's going to be center. Let's not even talk about it. Miles Rubin's going to be starting center. Justin Moore's going to be starting point guard. And Deywilk Tavarez is going to be the starting shooting guard. Just makes sense. I don't think he would go with any other combination there in terms of those three positions. Now, where it gets interesting is that small forward, power forward lineup, because he has some different options here. So in terms of starting in that traditional 3 spot, I would say you could start Kaimani, or you could start Joshua Ala Joseph out of California. I think at the 4, you could obviously start either Alexander Richardson out of Europe, or you could start Xavier Amos. I'm going to lean Amos purely because he has the D1 experience. You don't know what Richardson's going to do necessarily coming out of it. I think sliding, unless he's just like mind-blowing in practice and he's mind-boggling in the exhibition games, I think it's going to be hard for him to crack that starting lineup at first. However, look for him to take over that starting lineup spot if we start seeing some significant progress. Regardless, this guy's going to earn a lot of minutes, so I don't think it really matters, honestly, between who's going to start between Amos and Richardson. If he did want to roll with a couple of big guys, in terms of not playing Amos, you could start Richardson and Rubin together. I mean, you got 2 defensive bigs down there. You got the combo guards in terms of Justin Moore and Deywilk Tavarez, and then you still got Kaimani. I don't know if I would start Kaimani in that lineup, though, because, again, he's not a 3-point threat. So you can kind of probably slide some guys around there a little bit. However, it would be an interesting concept, because there's people that's been running like the 2 duo bigs there. So, you could definitely do that. I think either way, if you go with Amos or Richardson starting in that lineup, you're going to get 2 really good bigs. However, I would also see that if you wanted to provide a little bit more versatility and ease of mobility, you could pull Richardson and Amos out, pull them off the bench, slide them into run the two big lineup coming off the bench. I'm just spitballing here. Drew Valentine has a lot of options to be able to do with this rotation, especially the starting rotation, and not even counting about the rotation coming off the bench. So, I think all this is to be said, he can get really creative with what he does here. I think regardless, though, your bench core is going to be Dominic Harris coming off the bench. He's not a ball handler, but he's a prolific scorer. Honestly, I could even see him starting. In my head, I would lean with Tavarez because of what he's already done at the CAA level. I think Tavarez can just slide in immediately. And I'm a big, big, big believer. If I was a coach, I would always want an offensive spark plug coming off the bench. I'm an Indiana Pacer fan. Having Benedict Mathurin coming off the bench as that offensive just weapon to be able to kind of jolt players or jolt opposing teams who already have their secondary units in. So I would lean Dominic Harris coming in off the bench. Outside of that, I do think that somebody like Cade Dotson is going to be able to earn some more minutes this season. And it's like I said with Chuck Love III, I think he could earn some minutes here because it does look like he has that potential. I don't know how many. I don't think it's going to be more than 10, but I do think that he can come in and provide some important minutes this season coming off the bench for them in that secondary core unit. So, again, Valentine's got a lot of options here. It's a very deep roster overall, and he can kind of just do... I think you're going to see some mix and matching. Overall, he's got that returning core of Kaimani and Moore and Rubin with still a lot of new players. However, he's fortunate to not be like some of these other traditional mid-majors that are coming in with 15, 12, 13, 14, 15 new guys. At the A10, I'm sure he's got a little bit more NIL money, so he's able to retain these players in, and this is going to be a huge help for him because, again, he's got a lot of pieces that he can kind of mix and match here. One thing I want to call out is Their three-point shooting has gotten tremendously better. I actually think this is one thing that really hurt them last season. They finished 172nd in the nation last year while they shot 34% from three-point overall. Their top shooter was technically Jack Turner, who shot 42.9% across 11 games. He only averaged 2.8 minutes. So, yeah, if you take him out of that fact, the next closest was Sheldon Edwards Jr. He shot 37.6%. So now you have Deywilk Harris, you have Kate Dotson, Dominic Harris. That's all three people who have shot over 40% at some point in time in their career. And then you have others. You have somebody like Justin Moore who can come in and knock down some shots as well. You have Joshua Olive Joseph, who can also knock down 3-point shots. So I think that from beyond the arc, they have gotten tremendously better in a way that, like, it wasn't an albatross before, but I think this just unlocks more. Why does that unlock more? Because you have Miles Rubin in the paint. And you have the new guys in Richardson Amos as well, who's going to be able to play in the paint. By having those 3-point shooters on the outside, you're taking that pressure off your bigs inside, because all of a sudden, if you're not a good 3-point shooting team, teams just aren't going to guard you. I've seen this before with other teams in the past where if you're terrible at 3-point shooting, they're just going to clog the lanes and force you to take the shot because they know you can't hit it. So by being able to become what is probably going to be a top 100 3-point shooting team in this country, if all goes well, you're taking that pressure off Rubin, who then all of a sudden is going to have more opportunities to score inside. So when I was talking about earlier, I think he can really take off and take his offensive game to the next level. This is a big reason why I think this roster overall is actually better. I do. And, this is all pending everybody stays healthy, but I think by being able to take this huge step forward from shooting-wise, I think they can just really exponentially take themselves to the next level this season. I feel like I've done a lot of hyping up about this team, so I do want to call out, I still have some concerns. My number one concern would be the on-ball guard defensive players on this team. They have plenty of the help defensively down low between Richardson, Amos, and Rubin. That's not a concern. My concern, though, is last season the Ramblers only averaged 6.4 steals per game. Des Watson was averaging 1.4 of those. Obviously, he's no longer on this team. Out of the returnees, Kaimani had the highest steal rate with 1.9% overall. Dominic Harris finished with a 3.1% at UCLA in his minimal role, but at Loyola Marymount the year prior, that was just 1%. So we don't really know what we're going to be getting out of him in terms of on-ball guard play. Kate Dotson finished with a 3.5% rate in New Mexico last season. Again, that was a very minimal role. So it's one of those things that I don't know how big of an issue this is going to be. It's just that when I'm staring at these metrics and I'm reading about it and I'm understanding these players and their roles at their previous schools and coming out of high school, I think it's something to just kind of monitor and just see how it goes throughout the season. But that is one area that I think could be a slight concern because you are losing a really veteran player like Des Watson, who's a very good defender. But again, regardless, they're not going to be bad defensively because you have those big centers down low, and they're going to be able to take up a lot of the pressure, even if the guard defensive play is maybe a tier lower. Close out this video by just saying kind of everything that I've repeated already throughout this. I love this team. It's a super deep roster. Probably one of the deepest that I've covered this offseason so far. He was able to retain enough talent of his core while also bringing in a lot of additional talent. They addressed their 3-point shooting issues. They increased their depth at point guard. Again, when they lost Justin Moore last year, it was all hands on deck. But now they have backup guards that can come in and kind of take on that role if something were to happen. They've solidified their height with Miles Rubin, with bringing a couple guys that could equally just be as good as starters. So this is a team that has, number one, experience, and number two, it has the areas of improvement that they needed last season, and they still finished with 23 wins last season. So my point is, this is a team that has the ceiling to win the A10, and I fully believe that. However, the A10 is ultra competitive. I'm not making any prediction here on September 1st, 2025. I'm just saying that this team should finish top 4 or 5, easy in the A10, with the ceiling to win and return back to the NCAA tournament. Because I think that coming off that NIT run last season, they're hungry. They want to get back, and I think this could be the team to get them back. I want to thank you all for watching this video today. If you don't know already, I'm Elliot Crow. I run Bracket Busters. I have a weekly newsletter on Substack that you can go subscribe to. I'll link it down in the description below, or you can find it at bracketbusterhoops.com. We send out weekly newsletters. We talk about, right now we're covering roster turnover changes throughout the offseason. And then once we get into conference play, we're going to be doing weekly newsletters on risers and fallers among some of the best conferences outside of the power conference ranks. So if you don't want to miss out on a thing, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to be doing more videos, or you can subscribe to our Substack. It's free. You don't have to pay, and you get all the same content. So thank you all for watching today, and I'll catch you next time.